Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts, episode 8. We're going to go into modifications today. That's a running joke in our family. But first, let's
It's
start
no
off
joke.
with...
Modifications are no
No.
joke.
No, it's a joke.
They're necessity.
We'll get there. But first, admin. Welcome. If you haven't seen us before, this is our 8th episode, 20th season, not actual 20th season. It's just in season 2020.
Does that build in instant credibility when you have like season 20 instead of
season
like
1?
Season 1.
I mean, you can hope so. I think that's what you two were going for. I'm going to say epic fail, but hey, like, comment,
that would
subscribe.
mean you started this when you were 6.
Uh,
Emotionally, you haven't changed. How's that?
Sure. So, YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Facebook, like, share, comment. Spread the word for both of them. Find me, Hashknife Kid, on Twitter. Maybe I can put a link down there. Hashknife Ranch and Enterprises, Facebook. I'll also put a link there. And all right, admin's out of the way. Dad was interrupting me. And go.
I think we just need to modify how we do things around here a little bit. more
modifications in this family are not, hey, let's modify a plan so that things work better. It's let's modify whatever working piece of equipment is available so that we think it works better than it actually does.
That's not necessarily true.
But
there's
it can be true.
That, but only with your grandpa techs.
Yeah,
I've never modified anything that needed modification without good purpose.
Okay.
And made it better.
Yeah. Well, sometimes those modifications end up turning into, let's just go buy this. Because like one Christmas, I remember we worked on a Bale stabber. We're like, hey, let's get this thing that we can stab a giant 1,200-pound round bale on the back of the tractor, and we'll take it around that way. And primarily, it wasn't for feeding; it was for balancing the tractor as it's going over ice and stuff like that. But then we're like, you know what? It's going to cost us less money and less time to just go buy this thing at Shipton's, or no, it's TSC. Let's go buy it at TSC rather than keep using up the scrap iron for this contraption, because it was a contraption that we were going to create.
Now, in all fairness, I wasn't the one that built that or was trying to build that. That was your grandpa. Grandpa Tex was trying to build that. And it was wintertime, and there was out of necessity. And there was nothing, how can I put this? There was nothing that he would attempt to build that, because you got some scrap iron laying, you never throw anything away. I mean, again, I grew up with Depression era grandparents and was close to them, so, when you're born in 1916 and 1922, my two grandpas, Grandpa Yates and Grandpa Wayne, respectively, you can throw anything away. You might use that, and it does come in handy. So
sometimes it comes in handy 50 years later, but yes, it does come in handy.
Handy's handy. Some things have to wait to be appreciated, like a fine wine.
Like a fine wine, yeah. Or a good whiskey.
Or a good whiskey, that's right. So yeah, we show up at the ranch, and we were, you guys were in school. God, I don't even know how old you were. Probably, were you in high school? Maybe?
Yeah.
Barely?
Sophomore, junior. Yeah, no, I was like a sophomore, junior.
Okay. So we show up, and Dad's working on this thing in the shop. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm trying to build this thing. And he's got an axle that he's pulled out of something that was there, and he has, with a cutting torch, trimmed the end so it's pointed. Because
that's what we were walking into. Him with an acetylene torch, and he's cutting this edge. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the oxyacetylene torch, and he's shaving this with fire, and making a nice taper on it, trying to get it so it is nice and pointed so it will stab into a bale. And then he's mounting that onto a piece of like box steel, which is good design. I mean, one thing about Grandpa is very, very smart, and there are so many things that he did that was very like mechanical engineer type of, concepts. I mean,
just a poor man's version.
He loved fulcrums, put things up and then like get it to set on its own, tip over to a, on the backside of a fulcrum. levers, inclined planes, you name it. I mean, he used it, wheels and axles. I mean, it was perfect. So he's got this thing started to be mounted onto a piece of box steel and set so that it would fit on the 3-point of the tractor. And if you don't know what a 3-point on the tractor is if you see any tractor with they have two little arms that stick out, usually up and down, on the very back of a tractor that go up and down. That's a 3-point. And you can hook it up to that. And then there's a spot on the very top for the third attachment, which keeps things level and in plane instead of just lifting it up and things fall down. So, or swing. So he's got this built and he's on about his second or third attempt, maybe probably more at least. Is that 30?
Sure. Yeah, we can go 30. Yeah. I mean, so, we messed around with it enough that we finally called it on Christmas Day. I know it started around Thanksgiving and it ended on Christmas Day because everybody was sick and tired of it, to include my mother. And she said, all right, Christmas gift for Grandpa is we're just going to buy this damn thing. He got it.
Well, because, he was quite the researcher. He would check into whatever. Grandpa would go across town.
Oh, yeah.
In Billings for something that was cheaper, but he would spend more money in the gas and the time to go over and get something because it was, like $2 cheaper.
That's not the point.
It's not the point. But he would do that. So I didn't think about it. I thought, man, this thing's probably going to be $400 or $500 for this. It's fairly simple, but that's the way things are when they're, they're pre-manufactured. They're usually a little pricier. And your mom said, that's it. On the way home, she goes, that's it. We're not playing to this anymore. Because we would start to pick something up and it just didn't have the strength
it bend
to and it would bend or flex, and it wasn't going to work. And he had tried and tried, he had welds on top of welds and cuts. The stuff had been shaved back off and re-welded something a little heavier or different. I mean, he spent some significant time on this Bale retriever spike thing. So I said, all right, well, I'll take a look see what they cost. And we go by Shipton's, or I guess it was Tractor Supply, and look at this thing. I'm like, it's $150 for this.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like $125, $150, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and I was surprised how cheap it was.
Pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, pleasantly surprised is right. So I was like, okay, yeah, let's buy this. So we took it up there, and then all of a sudden it's like a little kid finding a better piece of candy.
Yeah,
because he's like just drops what he had in his hand and he goes to this thing and we hook it up and it works as designed. And he's like, oh, that's good. How much that cost? And it's like, I don't even know if we had that conversation, but I probably said something about you've got way more into time and welding rod.
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah, I think that was exactly what you said. More in time and welding rod, because the welding rod in itself we'd used up so much that we paid for it with the amount of welding rods that we burned, so we're good.
I remember one Christmas vacation timing in there. We went up and completely different deal. Years earlier, you guys were just little guys. I don't think you could come out in the shop because it was just too much going on, too busy. And we're using the welder and we were welding together sheets of just like 16 gauge metal. And he had already had them cut or sheared to the right height. And then we were welding them together and pulling them around on a frame that he had built. Because essentially what we're doing is building a hay feeder.
Yeah.
But he wanted to do it for some of the horses because he didn't want anything sticking up above where they could get in there and get a head, not stuck, but all of a sudden be feeding their heads in there and something spook them and then they get hung up and, damage or harm themselves. So he's making this thing that's about 30 inches tall, and we could not get this stuff to stick with a rod. I mean, we're just zapping as easily as we can, and it was just frustrating, but we got them built. And I think there were 3 or 4 of these things that were like 8-foot diameter. Oh my God, it was just, and it was cheaper. However, they weren't quite as well built, because the ones I bought here a couple years ago those things are they're beefy. I mean, the bulls can't do anything to them. They just kind of push them around at best when there's no bales in them or minimum hay to hold them back. So that was, that was another one that I was in on and was, I mean, materials are bought. You're going to use them. You got to use, you got to try. But yeah, he had everything all formed in the right angles. I mean, it was looked good when it was done, but it was like, oh my God. So for the probably $100 he had in materials on each one, you can buy one now for the low price of about $900. I mean,
Yeah.
no joke. They're pricey. So there's a lot of these modifications that are interesting. You know, and I remember some stories. I grew up with my Grandpa Wayne and Grandpa Yates telling me things, because you're with them all the time, and you wish you were just listening closer, or could word for word. I mean, I can hear their voices in my head. And I remember my Grandpa Wayne telling me about when he was a kid, they'd lose a bearing on a wagon, on a wheel. And so they had nothing. I mean, you couldn't just go get a bearing. I mean, you couldn't afford it, for one, and that you're so far away from town. They would literally take strips of bacon rind, because they took care of their own hogs. They would butcher everything, and they would take bacon rind, or just the hide off of a hog at this point. If you've seen bacon with rind on it, it's just a hide. And they would take strips of that and cut it just the width of what the bearing race was. And the race is what is like a round piece of steel that's tapered that the bearing sits into, and that's what rides and that's what turns on that. And the race is a part of the wheel, and then the bearing just turns, and the bearing has got a little hole that the spindle goes through, or it's not really your axle, just the spindle. And he said, oh yeah, we wouldn't have a bearing, so we would cut a piece of hog rind, and with the fat layer towards the bearing, because you'd have the hides on the outside, the fats on the inside, they would cut that so it would just make a perfect circle inside that race, stab that bad bearing in there that was no good anymore, put that in there, and then cover it with your cap of your basically a big washer, and then tighten that down just a little bit looser, but it would work. And he said you could get that thing fairly reasonably tight. And he said you'd be amazed how long you can go on a piece of bacon rind hide, or hog hide and fat in the place of a bearing. Just took up that piece enough that it would work. It was like, you did what you got to do. Yeah. So it was, but I mean, there's modifications are our attempt to improve, and there's lots of improvements that can be done on things from the manufacturer standpoint, because they're not dealing with it.
Yeah.
I mean, farmers and ranchers are, I mean, you do everything. You have to do everything.
It's I would argue it's also one of your first. They were the recyclers before recycling became cool.
Yeah. No, really. And it was not necessarily recycling, because you didn't break anything down. You just reused it or put a different purpose to it. Repurposing. There you go.
And repurposing. Yeah. Because I don't know, what's one of the most famous modifications you've ever done? Because I think one that we've done, we kind of researched it beforehand though, is the water trough. Like, we have the giant tractor tire that's just a water trough.
Yeah. Well, we just changed the whole way it worked, really. I mean, we had polyethylene type feet, or waterers.
Yeah.
Those like great big blue, and they're plasticky, and they come in what's called a nesting set, and they get beat up. I mean, they do flex in the wintertime. They'll get hit and they'll break, they'll shatter, they'll crack.
Well, we kind of modified that one too, I guess, now that I think about it, because originally it was just that polyurethane waterer, but then the stud was beating it all to pieces. Yeah. And so the best way we did to fix it was we just took some strips of, like, what was it, like it was like stable mat. It's like stable.
Yeah, exactly. It was,
and we just bolted it to the side.
Yeah, we used to have some belting from the mines, like up at the Stillwater mine.
Yeah.
They use these big long conveyor belts for different, like, rock crushers and things like that, and they go through that stuff, it wears out or it gets torn, and then they discard it. Well, you can buy that stuff for little or nothing, and we always had a roll of that stuff at the North Ranch. I was like, oh, well, let's go get us a piece of belting, and that stuff was, it's like 3/8 of an inch thick.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was heavy stuff, but you couldn't wear that out for the kind of stuff we were using it for. I mean, it's industrial strength, but yeah, we cut, yeah, you're right. Stable, like the mats that you would get for stables or inside of a horse trader, stock trader.
Yeah.
And then you're right. I forgot about that. We did modify it. So we did a pre-modification to the full mod.
Yeah. Because essentially it was like skirting. It was skirting around there because he kept pawing at it and breaking it.
Yep.
And the summer that we replaced that was the summer that the straw broke the camel's back because he crushed it. And
he opened it up and was like, "Oh, you jerk!" So, but these nesting things, you used to buy them in a set of 3, and one sat inside the other, and then the smaller one inside. But they're just barely smaller, so they supported each other. And if one would break, like usually the inside one would break, then you would pull everything apart, lift that one out of there, get rid of it, and then you had your second and third one outside. And then so they just come in a nesting, called a nesting set. And so we were down to the last one when we put the so the stable mat on there. And I went, okay, I'm tired of doing this all the time. Plus the overflow, I had an overflow tube that went just down and sealed in the bottom of the tank, and it went just down into the corral a little ways, probably 15 feet past the gate, and then it just drained right on through the corral and down into that low spot where we call it the slough, and it's just really just a spring drainage is all it is. I call it a slough if you want. I guess it will grow cattails, but when we decided to change, I went, all right, this is it. I'm not doing this again. But you put metal tanks in, they'll eventually rust. They'll go through. So I kind of looked around, and this was not my idea. I'd seen this before,
right? But
I wanted to improve on it, right? I didn't want to. I'd seen them where they kind of worked and they kind of leaked, but bought a big 8-foot tractor tire that was already cut. The bead was cut towards the outside rim. So instead of having a big tire with a small center, this width was all cut out. So you had this tire that come up and just turned in a little bit. I was like, okay. And I think I paid like, I don't know, $500-600 for this. Wore out. It was like a scraper tire, And so you were at the ranch that summer. That was the summer after your grandpa died. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Because I needed to keep you busy. I didn't need you in the bars. And
there's only one bar in Rygate, Montana, folks. All right. Well, I was tracking one, but I didn't.
The closest one, right?
Yeah, I didn't go there. I stayed home.
I know you didn't. But this is a really good job for you. We'll pull this out. We'll divert the spring, which we did, into another tank, and then so we could still water stuff, but it was away from where we could work. And then we completely tore all that out. We got some pictures of that. Should have sent those to you. I never thought about that, but and then I said, you got to have this level. And then we put the tire, and you got it pretty dang close. It's like within it's probably what, a 1/2 inch across level or off a little bit from one side to the other.
No, it was dead on. No, I got it dead on.
Water doesn't lie.
I'm telling you, when I started out, it was dead on. And I was so proud of myself because I did it on the first shot. I was super excited because I was like, oh, this looks level. And then I tried it out and it was level. So I'm just going to blame it on the extra weight that was thrown on there. So there you go.
Oh, okay. We'll do that. Anyway, so I talked to a couple of guys that had built these, and they said, oh yeah, they leak. Don't do it. It's, they'll last for a while, but they'll leak. And I went, okay. We used a lot of stuff improvised on some tanks at the ranch. When I was a kid growing up, we had there's bentonite hills over there. I mean, it's gumbo bentonite. I mean, it's just like this stuff, you pick it up and you can crush, it feels rubbery.
Right.
And so we would fix tanks by just dropping some bentonite in the bottom of that, and it would seal that hole right up, bottom of a tank. It was like, this stuff was awesome. So I said, you know what? Let's get some real bentonite. And we put the tank in place, And I don't know how many bags of bentonite. Do you remember how many we put around that, or you did?
I want to say it was like half dozen of just
Yes,
bentonite
yeah,
because
and
there was a lot more concrete because I carried
right,
it in there.
right.
Uh,
Well, and so yeah, so the around the inside with the tire, of course, it doesn't sit just level, right? It sits and it curves up for the bead, and so then
yeah.
you got this whole area under here where the ground meets it. That is, there's not a lot of surface area where that tire sits on the ground. So I had take all of this bentonite and pack it around, and it's dry. It's just a dry, crumbly. They look like
It's
large
almost like
flakes.
I was gonna say it's almost like soapy chalk in a weird. That's probably
Yeah,
the best way I could describe it.
yeah. And so I think you packed that thing in there with your hand really nice. And I told you it's got to
Yeah,
be nice and tight and
it was
even.
that was hard because, like you said, it's an 8-foot tire,
Mhm.
so keep that in mind, folks, because it's 8 foot, but the middle part, like you're saying, the tire itself comes in, but then because of that bead, it curves up. So then 8-foot tire, okay, not so bad. The inside's probably 5 feet in diameter. Okay, that's not so bad. But then you've got about 6 inches of depth.
Right.
6 inches across 5 feet in a circle. That's a lot of surface area. Somebody do some math on that one. Pi equals r squared, and you throw bentonite in there, and then add the 6 inches. And so I did what you're saying is the bags of bentonite. I like almost like like in the movies where they like lay out all the black powder on the road to like that. I kind of did that, and I just did it all the way around, and then I took my hands and I was pushing it under there and tucking it as much as I could, and of course dirt gets in there too. But then I did that, and I tried to get it up and into that crevice as much as I possibly could, and then we took the concrete to it, and there's legitimately about 2,500 pounds of concrete in there at
Well, yeah.
8
I mean,
pounds a
we
piece.
you made the seal with the bentonite, and so if you're
Yeah,
taking an 8 foot times pi 3.14, you're looking at about 24 plus feet of linear feet of area that's from 0 to about 6 inches deep. That's a lot of volume. And so you're talking what 300 to 400 pounds of this bentonite flake dried, and you stuff that in there, and we know that when water hits that, if it hits it, it's going to swell, so it'll
yeah,
help tighten that up, and it acts like a plug. So you did that, got that all in there, dumped all this cement in there. But first before we did that, and when we first laid the tire down, we had trenched down and then out so that we could take this to another tank. I wanted a tank that would feed not just the corral, but that slough area beyond that, because we put mares and colts or just a few head of something in there at times, so they need a place to drink, and it really improved that. Modification improvement, see,
yeah.
and made this drain so I can take the top off and we can drain it. I mean, we did all kinds of thinking ahead type stuff, and it had that set up, and then you poured the dry concrete bags of this Quikrete in that, so it kind of sloped up and off of the top of where the drain was at in the center, so it will shed down. Fill that right to the edge, and then of course you put the hose in there. We let it fill and let it sit to get a wet cure, underground cure or underwater cure for what I think probably 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, it was a couple days.
Yeah, just let it sit there and then drain out, and then we put the cows and bulls I think the bulls, it was summertime, it was like June, July, so the bulls and cows were together, and that bull come up there, and this guy was what, 2,400 pounds.
23, 20, 2290.
Was that what it
2290.
was?
Yep,
You
2290.
remember that?
Yep.
Okay. And he walked up to this, and he drank and then turned and then started rubbing on this thing, and you can't push the top of this curved part. I mean, you might be able to shake it, make a vibration, but this guy like leaned it over, and I'm like, oh
Here it
no.
goes. Here it goes. Yeah.
Perfect. I mean, it was there. So it's like, all right, this works. So
Yeah.
that's a good, but that's not just a modification. That's an improvement. We modified a couple of things doing it, but
Yeah, well, it was I was gonna say, I think it's like the next year around, because by that time next year I was gone, and I think it started leaking underneath. And you had Braden again. We could get a picture. His little butt was out in the air, and he was head first underneath of it trying to fix it.
Well, we had to tunnel down because it did. I think it got sometimes moss and stuff will come in there enough, and we have goldfish in the tires and these stock tanks to help eat the algae down. And these guys get so fat they can hardly swim. It's amazing how they just plump up. But I had him, or I tried to clear it with here we go, a modification your grandpa did. He took a piece of PVC pipe, put a cap on the end of it, and just made a plunger.
Right.
And you can set it just inside that and then pick it up and then ram it down really quick. And it creates enough pressure to blow anything out the tail end. Works like a champ. I mean, he's a smart guy.
It also helps with like keeping the goldfish from getting sucked in too.
Well,
float over the top of it.
Yeah, I think we had a screen on top, and it really doesn't do that much. The screen causes more problems with pluggage than anything, because a lot of stuff will go through, but some of the smaller things. But yeah, we got a little vigorous, I think is the word, and I was
cracked it,
hitting it a little harder than I should have, and I was like, okay, well, I got through there, it worked. And then in about a week, all of a sudden I see water coming up from underneath of it, and I'm like, oh no, what have I done? What happened here? And then it took a little bit. I thought, well, maybe it's leaking here at the edge, so where it comes into the pipe. That wasn't it. It was, I had knocked the elbow off of that thing enough that it just didn't work. So the next summer, your brother, he tunneled under there, and I said, man, we don't have to excavate this whole thing, because we got bentonite under here and we got cement. So we need to come under it and then grab a hold of this thing, and we'll figure out what we need to do. Well, we pulled it apart, replaced it, and then we took some fiberglass and wrapped around it, supported it, and then backfilled everything in. But he got in there, we learned he was claustrophobic.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So, yep. He's big and strong. I mean, he's a beast, right?
Yeah.
There's no question he's a beast.
Definitely. The thing is, I knew he was claustrophobic before he did, though, and that's because of wrestling.
Well, sure, yeah.
and I don't think he realized how claustrophobic he was until he started going underneath that tire, and he's like, "Oh, I don't like tight places."
Well, and he goes in there, and he says, "Okay, what are we going to do?" And I said, "You're going to go down in there." And he goes, "Uh-uh." I said, "Yep. I'm older. You're younger. You go down there." And so he did not want to do that. And he goes down, and we're working it and fixing it. And pretty soon something happened. And he's going down arms first, so you can't really push yourself out, because you're pushing yourself up a slope to get down to this overflow. And so you can't really move, and he's not moving at all. And I hear this, "Get me out of here!" And so there's these feet that are kicking up. All I see is his butt and his legs go. So I grab him and pull him out of there, and he's like, It's like, nope. And he goes, "I'm not going back down there." I go, "Yeah, you are. You are. Ain't done yet. We got to get this thing done, and we can't make this bigger. This fits you. I'm too big for this." Like, like, I ain't going down there. I've done all that kind of crap. And so we got it done. But yeah, that was fun. Oh God, I can remember. I showed up out at the ranch on a weekend. The North Place was about 4 or 5 miles north of town, and by the time you get there, it's probably 7 miles with a gravel road. You turn anyway. Grandpa's in the shop, Grandpa Wayne, and he's working on something at the bench, and it's winter time. I mean, there's ice everywhere, and I think it was early spring, late winter. And I go in and say, "What you doing?" And he goes, "Oh, we're making some caulks." And I said, "Caulks?" He goes, "Yeah, it's pretty dang icy out here, and I gotta be able to ride this big kitten mare that I trained when I was about 12, 13 years old. And one of his favorite mares. That mare would do anything for him. But anyway, she was good. Stout.
Did she live up to her name as Kitten?
No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you wonder why I'm superstitious about names. Mm-hmm.
Well, she was a rip. And
I hate when people call horses princess or
yeah,
prince or fairy dust or leprechaun's unicorn. Like, no.
sugar. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
So
Anyway.
anyhow, yeah, he's got a piece of metal. He's made many of them, and they're about 3/8 of an inch wide, thick, and about a 1/2 inch wide, maybe a little longer, maybe almost 3/4 of an inch. And these things are tapered. He's put them in on the grinder, and he has tapered these things. You could shave with them. I mean, they were so sharp. And he's welding them onto horseshoes that we've got, just some rim shoes there, and he's welding them on 4 spots in the heels and the toes. And he's making a set of caulks because he's got some scrap iron there, and he's not going to go to town for it. And I'm like, ooh, this does not look good to me. I mean, at that age, I'm like, and at this time, I'm like,
Imagine a
15,
horse
maybe.
kicking another horse with that.
Oh God! Oh, it would just tear or overreaching and the horse tear themselves up. I mean, they're going to go dull pretty quick. But he used them. I mean, he made these things. Guess who got to shoe the horse?
Yeah. You did.
Yeah.
Of course, he's too smart to do it. He's like, I'm not doing this. I'm gonna make the kid do it.
Exactly. So I'm in there, and this is another. So that's a modification, but this leads to maybe one of those safety things. And there's some things that you just have no modesty over. You just don't care, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm shoeing this mare, and I'm driving the nails into the shoe, and the ones I'm holding her with my thigh, and I'm driving her close to my thigh, but I'm not clinching them out or not bending the nail and clinching it and cutting it off, away. Just with right away. And I had done that a couple of times on one foot. She just stood there. I got done and I clinched them all, or with the claw part of the hammer, and I turned them and peeled them off of there. And he says, of course, he lets me do all 4 of them, and he goes, "Hey, dummy, you might want to do that one at a time."
Yeah.
And I went, okay. So the next one, I did it again. I had a brand new pair of Levi's, I think, or Wranglers, one of the two, whatever the pants de jour were that we could afford that day. But I do remember they were almost brand new. And I'm not using any shoe and chaps, nothing. I'm just using on my pants. And I did it again. And the last one going in, it always seems to be the last one when they pull. And I hit that, and she pulled that leg, and I was like, whoa. And it just ripped right through my pant. You can see 4 streaks of cut right on my thigh. And I felt it go down pretty deep, and I just pulled my pants down. I'm looking, there was 4 nice little scratches of blood.
Yeah.
It wasn't deep, but just enough. Like, oh man, that was a vulnerable place. Every time I drive a nail in a horseshoe, I think of that moment. That's why you clinch those every time. One was bad enough, but 4 of them. Oh man, that was lucky. Because they're pointed down and they're pulling their foot down. Oh, I'm just lucky I didn't go right through dig in and go to a femoral artery.
Definitely. Like the only time that's ever happened to me, it wasn't with a nail though. It was a brand new cut hoof. I cut the hoof. I still have the scar on my bicep because it was a hind foot, and I cut it and I rasped it down. And it was nice and sharp. And I was just about to get to where I start kind of turning it over so it's not so sharp, and she pulled right through my arm, and nice big scratch right here, still to this day. And that was over 10 years ago.
Well, you were trying to hold the hoof, as I recall, so she didn't pull it from you, but she got away.
Well, she was being not so nice, but that's exactly what happened. And that's just from the hoof.
You're just trying to chamfer the end of that or bevel that the end of that hoof a little bit around. But oh god, there are let's see what those showing.
I was gonna say another actually useful modification is the one that I think Grandpa started and you just kind of finished. It was like an old it was either hatchet or hammer handle, and took a sickle, put it in there. We still use it. A sickle section, I guess, like it's a little triangle that goes on the front of like a swather or a combine or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just a cutting blade on a swather, or combines have them too. Yeah.
Yeah, like bolted it through the handle and use it to cut the bale netting on the round bales, which that can be handy. I think we gave that up though because they're like, it's just faster to use our knife. So
Yeah, that works really well when you have just strings on a bale, because you can just kind of
Yeah.
chop it, and it just you grab it, chop chop. With a net, there's enough there that it holds back. So yeah, just a really good sharp knife is it works best on the netting. But
But it's one of those
oh
things
my
also like
god,
as a weapon, like you kind of want to stay away from because it can slit you open pretty good.
right? Well, yeah, I
Uh,
put it in a vise, and then I sawed through
yeah.
the top of the handle, so it was just
What, like
sitting there, and then I drilled a
4
couple
inches or
holes.
so, and then just
Yeah,
set it in.
yeah. And so it's just a hammer handle with this sickle hanging out there, this triangle, and it's effective. I mean, yeah, it'd be a good weapon if you needed one. But
Well, and if you put a sickle section in your hands, even like when I was working on the swather the first couple years with Grandpa, like I put it in my hand, it's not really that sharp in your hand. You're like, oh, this isn't that bad. I don't really understand, but then you see how fast that thing moves and with the serrated edges and stuff, it'll go through anything.
well, if you feel them like a knife blade when they're brand new, they are sharp. I mean,
Yeah,
so it just cutting against it or moving against it is
and
something. But
maybe it's those grooves with the serrated edge that it doesn't quite feel that way unless you're purposely trying to test the edge. But yeah, it a sickle section is surprisingly uh I don't know, unintimidating. Like it just doesn't look that bad, and then you find out how bad they can be.
oh
And
yeah,
it's
oh yeah, ooh, that'd be a really good weapon. I mean, it really
yeah.
would. Uh, God, this is when I was really little. Grandpa Yates didn't do a lot because he's mostly in the saddle all the time.
Oh
He
yeah.
he didn't do a lot of machining work. I mean, he was just an old cowboy that's what he did was, he fed and stuff, but he didn't turn dirt. He would hay if he had to. He'd, irrigate. And I mean, those are things you got to do, but he wasn't really in a position where he did a lot of the modifications. There's usually guys, because he worked on other places, and and by the time I came along, he was working for other people, but they usually had somebody who was kind of a mechanic that did most of that work. So those jobs were segregated. But Grandpa Wayne built a stacker, and you see them around. Everybody built them, made them, and it was nothing more than a car frame, and it had a seat in it sitting there. You might have like a car seat, or you might have just a single seat. Usually it was a kind of a car seat, but that one was just a single seat from an old like a buck rake. I mean, it was a metal seat that you sat on, and it had the spring steel that supported it, and it had a front. It was all the way just kind of solid, but with some welded rebar, things like that. And then it had spikes underneath of it, like what you would have for a buck rake,
Mm-hmm.
or where you would feed it to a like an overshot stacker. So you got these long, and everybody had them. They were long sticks that were tapered to the end, where you could float above the ground, and you could stab underneath of a bale, and it would just slide up to it. And then you had this front of this thing. You could lift it up with, and there were some hydraulic rams on it that you'd use hydraulics and cables, and these freaking cables are whipping around above you and off to the side of you, and you climbed in the center of this thing. And then if you got up too high, of course it would get tippy one way or the other, so you had
Mm-hmm.
to be really careful and slow. And you picked it up, and then with the hydraulics, it was on a pulley system, would push, because the hydraulics wasn't enough. You had to have pulleys that to fully push it. This thing would push forward and push him off, and then you could pull it back in and go get another load. Well, that's how you stacked. And we
Oh,
built the
okay.
stacks out in
In
the
the
field.
loft, like stacked all the hay in the loft, like took it into the.
No, out in the field.
Oh,
Or
geez.
you would
Okay.
put it on the truck, on the tractor this way. So it's basically like like a giant pallet, or like a giant um, pallet forks, only they're round. I mean, this thing is, you're talking 8 foot wide, and you get as
Hmm.
many bales, and you can pick up 12, 15 bales on this thing. And if you're put in stooks, which a stook is, 6 bales, 3 laid on edge, and it was done with a machine that would come behind or you drug behind a baler, and it would drop them in, and they would lay sideways, all 3 of them, and then the 2 on top and 1 on that. So you'd have a triangle of bales called a stook, and it was called a stooker. Well, you could pick up about 3 of those with this thing and pick it up, and depending on how high you went, of course, the higher you got, the tippier it got.
Mm-hmm.
And you could build a stack out in the field, or if you if you wanted to move that stuff, you just brought the truck over, which has a, that truck was like a 14-foot bed. I mean, it wasn't what, but you could man as high as you could go with it and then tie it on, and you'd be stacking on this thing, and you're at the edge of it. I mean, you're up there in the air 15, 18 feet, at the top of this thing. And it's like, it's dangerous and risky, but this thing was a contraption. I mean, it was
like a Mad Max type thing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I can remember.
I'm just looking, like, in my head, I'm thinking you got bolts everywhere. There's like hay hooks, like just.
Those stupid cables. I mean, they're like 3.5-inch cables, some of them, and I mean they would literally whip and bounce. And this thing was dangerous, to say the least. And it had you could articulate the forks this way so that you could come and you could drop down, or you could pick it up, or you could slide them off once they're there if they wouldn't quite push with that forward piece, right? And then bring it back. But
you just had to use gravity.
Yeah. And so I can remember being about 4 years old, and the creek, Careless Creek, runs through there, and it is about, in a lot of spots, they're probably, 12, 15 foot wide across it, at least. Some places much wider. But right around the house and the barns and the corrals, it would snake through there, and it's deep, and it's really slow water because it is so deep. But you can see the eddies swirling around in this thing all over the place, And I'm in the yard, and he's doing something, and he goes, "Come here." And I'm like 4 years old playing in the yard. And the yard was surrounded by big wagon wheels. That was the whole fence. And the big wagon wheel in the center was on hinges, and it would move in, and it was so solid. I spent hours swinging on that stupid gate, right? And it was full wagon wheels, the wood spokes, the hubs, everything was there. And he says, "Come here." So he puts me on this thing, and he pulls me up. And of course, he smoked at that time like a chimney.
Chain smoking.
And I remember him sticking his cigarette in his mouth, and he grabs me. I comes over, he tells me where to come, and I'm 4 years old. I know I wasn't even close to being in school yet. And he picks me up, and he sets me on the gas tank of this thing and says, "Here, hang on to this," which was the gas spout. Right?
Oh, jeez.
So I'm sitting on this thing with my feet forward, and I'm with Grandpa. This is awesome, And so we go and we do some stuff out in the field, and we're gone like, I don't know how much time, maybe an hour or something. At that time I have no concept on this contraption, and we come tooling back in the yard, and here is his wife. And she is bawling and screaming and crying. And like,
thought you were lost.
She thought I was in the creek, because that's one thing you always watch with the little kids, because and there was a bridge across the water that was literally this wide, and it was up high on the banks, and you could walk across it, but the thing would flex and move. So you did it just one person at a time, and they had some cable across the sides, but still, little kids are little kids. And a 4-year-old, and I can remember that ass chewing to this day. Oh my God. He sat there, and he just took it, listened. "Yep, I should have told you." And I'm sitting there on the gas tank. Grandpa's in trouble. And she jerks me off of that thing, and I was in trouble, I was like, I didn't do anything. Oh my God. But this thing was just it was horrible. Anyway, I was glad to see that thing kind of not get used anymore. I never got to, thank God. I was so close to that age that I was more use by
doing the physical labor.
Yep, than I was to because I mean, there was a trade-off. Yeah, it was a piece of crap, but you didn't have to throw bales around. So usually older cousins got to do that kind of work. So yeah.
What's the most famous modification you've had to make?
God, there's a lot, Kaylin. I don't know.
Like one that I was thinking of too is you're thinking about Grandpa Tex's his square bale loader. We talked about that a little bit, I think, at one point, but he had just the giant OSB flatbed, and he used fulcrum pulleys, winches, all sorts of
Yep.
stuff. That was back when we thought square bales were going to be the thing, and
Well,
they kind of
and we
they
bought.
were for a little bit, but then they died off.
Well, there's still a lot of square bales in the country. The reason we got that, you were pretty little, but we got that hay that year because there was little to no hay in the country, and it was not good hay. And we knew if we fed this off, we were going to have to supplement with cake. I mean, these
Yeah.
cows were going to suffer, and they did, but we had no way to handle those kind of bales at
Yeah,
that
we don't
time.
have that
So,
machinery. Well, we still really don't. Not for square bale. We could make it work if we
well,
had to now.
yeah, we got the bale loader, and I've made it work with them. Where I have modified it.
There you go.
The deals that poke in and made them longer so they extend. Your grandpa actually did that, and then I kind of improved on that. So it went in, and you can pick them up and make them come up and set down, but you could only feed one bale on the bed. You could put the other one up, but then you had to be really careful about how you fed it off. A lot of times it would come off in a chunk, so you couldn't spread it out. But one of the things I missed the boat on this in a big way, and I think I was a warden at the time. And so I was in the backcountry a lot, packing in, and I'd take a big long loop and, put 25, 30 miles on a horse, over a couple of days, 3-4 days, and checking people and a camp. And I always had a small, at the time it was Pure water filter. I think they were bought by like Katadyn or something. And we still got them. They pump, and you can pump them and filter water. And I was staying in one spot, and there was another warden with me, and we were going through quite a bit of water. And I went to myself, and all of a sudden I went, this is working. I've primed this filter. I wonder if. And so I stuck the bucket, filled the bucket, the collapsible bucket, up in the tree, and then I devised some kind of a clamp for it where I just folded it over and held it, like a chunk of wood or probably string or something, to make a clamp. And I had that up there, and this filter was primed enough that it would run down the hose, and just have the hose hanging there. You just take the little clamp off, and you could fill your water bottle, and it worked like a champ. I mean, it wasn't high pressure, but it would, it would still work. You weren't sitting there pumping it. And I was like, oh man, I'll bet they got one of these somewhere. So when I got back to town, I thought, this is so handy. I am using this. And then we would go in the backcountry with Grandpa and you and Braden and I, and so handy to have a steady store of good water without pumping it constantly. Some static flow, and you can fill bottles while it's doing it, and fill pots, fill coffee cup or pot, whatever. And so I went back to a place in Billings, or the base camp, where you could get the filters. You can get them other places too, but they were kind of that place is kind of like the preppy backcountry sandal wearing, tight pants type in the backcountry, make no tracks type of folks. Which, don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against them. I just don't want them yelling at me for being on the backcountry of the horse.
Yeah,
we've been there.
Yeah.
So I go in there and I tell him, I said, hey, this is what I'm looking for. And the guy goes, yeah, we don't have anything. I don't understand what you're saying. And I was like, okay, how can you not understand this? So I said, I'll tell you what, let's do it. Have you got a filter? And he goes, yeah, let's. And so I showed him what we did. And I said, I think if you just fill it, it may be able to do it, and then just draw some suction out. So we're in the back room of the base camp, filled up like a bathroom sink, and stuck the filter in there, and it sucked up. And then we got it to pull, just sucked on the deal to get it to draw, and it was working. And he's like, the face is like, oh my God, I said, yeah, I've been using this like this, but I thought maybe you guys had something more in this line that was already a product. It was more of just a passive type filter. He goes, no. And you could see the wheels were turning too. And my wheels were turning like, okay, what can I do this? I went back to that store like the next year, and guess what they had?
They made it.
Passive filtration that they had. And I thought, you wonder if they didn't get that. I mean, somebody else's, I'm not that smart, but it's like, that was a great modification, just a reuse of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, dang, could have got into the filtration business here. Passive filtration.
Yeah, there's little stuff like that. One especially
Yeah. Well, your grandpa did that when he was in construction. He had a, they always used a hand level, which you could see through it and you could adjust it.
Yeah.
And the bubble would be inside this thing where you could see where it would run, and you could read it, and it had mill dots and lines for leveling land. Literally, that's what they used before they ever had any kind of laser stuff, anything like that. And those surveyors out there said it was a hand level. And so he thought, there's got to be a better way how we can put something like this and line it up. And he had a thing designed with lights on it, on the like the caterpillar and the scraper. And it was mainly on the cat because he could adjust the scraper. And then at the end of the field had these lights that would light up based on where you were at. I mean, it was pretty cool. I mean, it was really cool. He took that, he thought, yeah, maybe I got something here, but I need some help designing this thing. He took it to Eastern Montana College.
Every time you do it, that's when you lose your leg up on anything, because people steal your ideas. Yeah.
Well, and he was working with a couple of guys there at the school, and they were saying, yeah, let's give us some time. We'll work on this. And then come, and they were in communication. Then he went back one day. He didn't hear anything from him. He's calling him, trying to get a hold of him. No cell phones in that days. It was all hard landline. He went up. These guys were gone. Nowhere around. And it wasn't long after that, like laser type technology started really, really in its infancy. But it was a couple of years after that. It was like, you always wonder, some of these modifications you make, where could they go? What can you do with them? But
and that comes with intellectual property. I mean,
right. Well, and and you take somebody at a handshake, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's work on this together. And Dad said, we'll partner up on this, and we can all benefit. And yeah, not him.
I would say that's where people like us come at a disadvantage, because we come from a different world.
It's a different culture of, you trust somebody at their word, and I've become very jaded, of course, being in law enforcement for as long as I did that at a different level too. But I mean, I still do handshake deals with people.
Just gotta be careful.
You got the neighbor down here who we bought 200 head ton of hay from him this year. Handshake. We agree on price. We handshake. We're gonna do it. And we actually started hauling it in there before I really knew what the price was going to be, because you know what, we have a relationship, and we trust each other. And I know he's not going to really jab me with a big sharp stick, and he knows I'm going to pay the bill. So we deal with that. Jim Hinkle's another one. We bought a lot of hay from him over the years. Not in big quantities every year, but you know what? The price is this, even when the price is way high, because some of those years when it's low, we're still doing this, and it's balancing out. And he and I've talked about that, and it's like, hey, that's just good business, and that's taking care of each other, and everybody's still profiting, hopefully, and it works out. So, it's a different culture now, completely different culture. So,
I think we're gonna start wrapping this up, but it's the season. What's the biggest seasonal modification you've made to make my mother, your wife, happy during the Christmas time of year?
I made a star out of wire.
Okay.
So to go onto the top of we took a trellis that's downstairs outside the bedroom patio, because it's getting pretty shaky. It's pretty old. Took it up.
I'm taking it at this. This is a new one, because this is something I don't really recall. Okay.
Yeah, and wrapped lights around it. And I thought, God, this looks kind of stupid. I don't know if this is going to work really well. Lit it up that night, and I was like,
looks pretty good.
Your brother's girlfriend showed up for dinner, a week ago, Sunday night.
You're setting expectations he's not going to be able to fulfill.
Maybe. Well, apparently she's a Christmas nut.
Oh, yes. I got somebody to go to Christmas light looking at with me.
Oh, yeah. She's all in. But she drives up. She goes, oh, my God, I drove up and I saw your Christmas tree lit up. And she's like, I didn't realize there was a tree there. Well, it's this trellis. And so now it's missing a star. So then I had to take smooth bale and wire and make a star for your mom out of it. And then she wrapped it up, and it's Christmas time. So, hey, I got a quick one for you though.
Okay.
Your great grandpa Wayne's dad, Grandpa Walt, was born. God, I don't even know what year he was born.
Not even my great grandpa. It's my great great grandpa.
Your great great grandpa, my
Yeah.
great grandpa, in about 1900,
Okay.
late 1800s. God, I need to look that up. He was a very, very good whiskey maker.
Oh, okay.
And
Did not know
so,
this.
yeah. Well, oh yeah. Well, you've heard some of the stories where they made whiskey at the ranch during Prohibition, and he
Yeah.
actually, old J.R. Sterling. Okay, Grandma Stella was married to Grandpa Walt, your great great grandpa.
Yeah.
He was hired by J.R. Sterling out here from, because they were over in that Oregon country for a while. Come over, Idaho, actually is the Panhandle, Idaho, because Grandpa was born at Webb Ridge, Idaho, on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. That's where he was born in 22. So JR hired Grandpa to come and make whiskey. He was pretty good at it. Well, great grandpa, my great grandpa Walt, was fairly ingenious as well. And he had a Boilermaker's license, of all things, one of the first ones in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to increase production on the whiskey mash, instead of just, firing it up, heating it, they started using steam.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so he started a steam boiler and put steam in. I mean, they were making high production whiskey. And there was, I think I've mentioned, there was 5 different still sites Grandpa told me about. I found several of them, 3 of them I found. Found the old copper pot or boiler in the last one, but he put steam on that, and they were getting pretty brazen at times. I mean, and revenuers were there. They nearly got caught numerous times. And it's one of those things where the revenuers don't know, but everybody else in the world knows. I mean,
yeah, of course.
He took loads in a Model T to old JR did to
I just keep
Helena.
thinking George Jones and White Lightning.
Yeah, in a way, I guess it was pretty good whiskey. I never had any. Your grandpa did. He had some, but of course, my grandpa, your great grandpa Wayne. He worked in a still. He went 2 weeks of his freshman year of high school and went, Pat, I'm not doing this, and worked in the still and worked on the ranch. Yeah, I know. And so Grandpa Walt hooked a steam whistle onto this steam boiler, and when the Milwaukee Road, on some of those lower still sites, because they went right on way up the creek a couple miles, at night they would be just producing this, because you can't see steam plume, you can't see all that stuff, and they're just making production big time. And there's no crossings there on the lower end of that river, but the Milwaukee Road engineer would go by and go doot doot, and Grandpa had this steam whistle on the still, and they go doot, he toot back to it at night. So, but they improvised stills and made high production whiskey by, putting some steam to it, more heat, more better, so it worked out really well.
It's got to be one of the better modification stories.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it kept them alive, right? Of course, later on, Grandma worked out pretty well on this, because she decided that marrying the guy who owned the place was better than marrying the guy or staying married to the guy who worked the place. The place. So it worked out really well for her.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a ton of different. I mean, we modify stuff all the time, and your mother's always on me about modifying stuff, because you look at something you can buy or get, and it's like, it isn't going to quite work well, but if we did this to it, now it'll work a lot better.
Yeah.
So yeah,
maybe we should start doing some videos on here's what we got, here's what our plan is, and then we just start going through the process, and then be like, all right, here's what we started with.
There's so many things. I look around and I go, oh yeah, Dad did that one, or I'll look, oh, that looks like Grandpa's work. I mean, you can just tell by the way it's done who did it, because I know those guys so well. But yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll end it there. So it's all you.
Oh, well, I think for you who are watching, we thank you till you're better paid.